If you haven't watched it yet, there is a part 1 of this tutorial where I talk about all the tools you need for making a violin, and there is a more cinematic video where I showed you the entire build without saying a word. Make sure you've checked them out too. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the wood choices, what to look for, where to buy, as well as the timber dimensions and the accessories you need for making the violin. So, enough talk, let's get started. You probably know it already that the woods we use for instrument making are called tonewood. They have specific sonic properties vary from one species to the other. In most cases, the top of the violin is made out of spruce, the ribs, the back, and the scroll are made out of maple, and there are not many alternatives you can choose from. This line going along the violin body here, which we call the purfling, is usually made of two strips of pure wood that are stained black and with a poplar strip in the middle. In modern settings, the nut, the saddle, and the fingerboard are usually made of ebony, but makers in the old days often use maple for the fingerboard and put just a thin piece of ebony on top of it. And they sometimes will decorate it with ivory or some other materials. And note that ebony is an endangered species. I don't want to misguide you here, but you may also want to try out other kinds of wood such as rosewood or even sauna wood or some other synthetic fingerboard to save the environment. Generally speaking, grain orientation is the first thing you need to care about when looking for woods for your instrument, or you can think of it as how the wood is being cut. The highest quality violin woods are sold split rather than saw, but those wood are difficult to find nowadays and are expensive as they only work well with large trees. So for us, quarter sawn is the best choice. Perfectly quarter wood has a grain lines at a perfect square to the surface. This is what gives the top its appearance of long and straight lines of grain from one end to the other. And speaking of grain, straight lines of grains are desirable for appearance in the top and stability in the back. But it may be contrary to what you've heard before, that fine grain is however not a characteristic of the tops of the best violins. Most of the classical makers use spruce of medium to fine grain spacing, as fine grain wood is usually heavier because it is denser, and excess weight is definitely a big no-no. Maple in old violins, on the other hand, is often extremely fine grained, but such wood is nearly impossible to obtain nowadays, just like the split wood. And lucky for us, it does not appear that grain width is an important tonal factor in maple, but if I can choose whatever I like with all the things being equal, I pick the finer grain example because it just looks better. And if you want one true ultimate answer to look for the best wood in the universe, older woods really gives the magic. But of course, we can't blame the performance of the best violins on their simply being old, as there are more than enough old and bad violins to disprove that idea. So if this is your first few attempts, I would rather save the old ones for later. Personally, I recommend something well dried, aged more than 3 to 5 years, and relatively plain wood to start with, because working it well demands a much lower skill level, so there is less chance of making mistakes. The pattern you can see on a piece of maple here is called flamed or figured. Highly flamed ribs are very difficult to bend as they break easily on the curves, while highly figured backs and scrolls are more difficult to carve because with figured wood, by necessity, much of the work is against the grain. And many classical period violin makers use very plain wood at times, and even the best of those makers usually make the neck and the scroll from relatively plain stock that was sometimes even nearly 3-figure. Since unlike the back, the scroll required carving in all sorts of direction, and because of the shape, you often cannot choose the best direction and angle for carving with the fewest problem. Also, I would avoid knocks, mineral streaks, sag pockets, and spouting, which is black marks from fungus, deep water marks, and mold, or have them where I know they won't cause a problem. And something worth mentioning here is that there are actually many great and important, and now expensive, Italian violins have almost everything I've just mentioned. But none of these so-called defective woods that would today be immediately rejected by modern makers seems has a bit to do with, or should I say, go against the tone and structural stability. And with regard to the tapping of pieces, Rubber Band, one of the founders of the famous violin shop, Ben and Fushi, once commented that it is very seductive to believe that the pieces of a musical instrument should themselves have a musical sound. But there is absolutely no concrete evidence that it makes any difference whatsoever. There are a lot of superstition and black magic in the violin making world that can really blur your vision. Things like you must have some kind of spiritual energy, mostly inborn, in order to put the sound poles into the right place, or even putting some strange metallic plate on the violin that said it would resequence the neutrons and protons around the space of your violin to make the violin sounds better. All with the logic being that a non-secret or simple method obviously cannot give special results. And tapping of pieces is one of them. Also, what I would ask is, what specific thing are they actually looking for from the tapping? And if Stradivari didn't even care about knocks and sag pockets, why would he care about the tapping? My Sifu Michael Darnton always remind me that don't be seduced into believing that ideas which sound good are therefore good. Instead, get some experience and test those ideas for yourself. You can go check out tonewoodsforfiling.com to see if there are anything you like, and you should also go check out on eBay or some other methods such as a lumberyard that you may know. Generally, wood is priced according to the seller's perception of its quality, which is a good start but not totally reliable. Most good quality violin wood comes from Germany and the southern parts of the Eastern Europe. They are available from many sources and can be expensive. And there are always persistent rumors that some European wood comes originally from the US and Canada. I can't tell you a specific way to tell the difference, but instead, I recommend you to find a source of wood that does the job for you and stick with it. And when you find something you like, buy as much as you can afford, as it may not be there next time you're shopping. And here's what you need. You will need a piece of spruce for the top, a piece of maple for the back. Most violin body woods came with a trapezoid shape. They should be around 400 millimeters long and 120 millimeters wide. For the thickness, one side of it should be at least 42 millimeters, while the other side should be around 24 millimeters. But we will then cut it into half to do some sort of book matching, so that makes it into two pieces of maple or spruce that are 20 millimeters thick on one side and 11 millimeters on the other side. Try to find some that have already been rip cut in the middle so you don't have to do it yourself, and that would really save you some time and energy. But anyway, I will walk you through how to do a rip cut later, so don't worry if you cannot find any pre-cuts. And if you can only get something rectangular, simply get two pieces of maple with 20 millimeters thick and you'll be just fine. If you're doing a one-piece back, the maple has to be 400 millimeters long, 240 millimeters wide, and 20 millimeters thick. And of course, larger pieces will cost you more. And just between you and me, I actually like two pieces back much more as it is more stable. And also, many of the greatest violins of all time, such as the Messiah, the Titian, and the Canone, are all of two-piece back. And you'll need some thin pieces of maple for the ribs. Here are the links for the bows, and make sure they're wider than 32 millimeters and thicker than 1 millimeter. Some shops may sell them with the back together, and some skillful people would do another rib cut on the side of the maple for the back to get the ribs. You can do that too if you want to save some money, but safety here is not guaranteed. And you'll need a relatively smaller piece of maple for the scroll that has to be at least 300 millimeters long, 80 millimeters wide, and 50 millimeters thick. And if you can find a nice piece of maple that is large enough, there are chances that you can make two scrolls out of it. And we will need some more spruce to make 6 little blocks, a thin and long base bar, and 12 pieces of linings. It is very important that the material for the blocks are all taller than 32 millimeters, and make sure the base bar and the linings are long and thick and tall enough. Some shops will give you all this as a pack, but if they don't, I would get a bigger piece of spruce, one that for viola, for instance, and use it to make my top, blocks, base bar, and linings, or just simply buy one more piece of spruce for all these interior materials. And if you're planning to do this, make sure this second one has no precuts in the middle, so you really have enough material to work on. And this piece of material should be more than enough for at least 3 violins. And don't forget to get the material for the fingerboard, the nut, the saddle, and the purflings. For this, I recommend you to buy some semi-finished ones and refine them because good quality ebony are very hard to cut and can dull your tools very quickly. And purflings are kind of tricky for beginners to make. If you want to buy a raw piece of ebony and make the fingerboard, nut, and saddle all by yourself, make sure there are no brown and white color in your ebony. Good quality ones should be in all black. And if you feel very lost in this rhyme of numbers and measurements, just go buy some sets from a tonewoods store and you should not need to care about any of this. You can also screenshot all these measurements for future reference, and I will walk you through all this in detail again in the step-by-step guide tutorial. So don't worry, just get something that is big enough or bigger than enough, then you'll be fine. For the accessories, you will need to buy a set of packs, a tailpiece and some fine tuners, or a tailpiece with built-in fine tuners, a tail gut, a chin rest, a bridge, a stick of sound posts, an end button, and some strings. And also a solder rest if you don't have it yet. You can easily find them on Amazon or eBay, and maybe also from your local music stores. They can be made of various kinds of wood. Different types of wood will produce different quality of sound. If you have no idea what to have, just look for something that is pretty and make sure they are made of real wood, as some really cheap ones can be made of plastic. I'll find some that I think is suitable and put the link in the description below so you can check them out too. And also, I would buy more than one set of packs with the same style and more than one piece of bridge for a second or third or fourth chance, you know. In the end, you will get to choose whatever wood you want depending on your budget, taste, and experience, as you will gradually develop your own preference for these things. I know it would be a bit overwhelming when looking for the best wood in the universe, as there are a lot of scientific studies and urban legends on the measurable qualities of wood, but virtually none having to do with which qualities really make the best violins. Some makers choose pieces that ring, some want a specific type of ring, and some want wood that doesn't ring at all. Some want hard grain lines in their spruce, and some are very particular with grain width, runouts, and quartering, while some makers don't care about any of this at all and use whatever wood that's in front of them. Just be mindful that while Stradivari probably was concerned with wood density, he most likely had no way to calculate it to the 3 decimal point degree that seems so important to modern makers. It is difficult to say which qualities have the most material effect on tone because everything matters. And wood choices is only one of the many elements that make a violin, and you'll understand it along the way. So I say don't get too hung up on which frequency matches which density in order to make which kind of geometric moving sound on your wood until you really have some experience in using it. Instead, start with some nice but not excessively decorative wood and move on to making the violin.